It's a big foreign assignment for the new untested U.S. Secretary of State. And just to make the stakes in Mexico more interesting for Rex Tillerson and the new head of Homeland Security, John Kelly, the Trump administration preceding their departure with sweeping new guidelines that make it easier to criminalize and deport illegal aliens all to Mexico, regardless of their nationality. So, what response from Rex Tillerson's hosts? With no sign of Donald Trump's build a wall rhetoric slowing, how does President Enrique Peña Nieto handle relations with his country's #1 trade partner? Washington denies that mass deportations are looming, but already many of the U.S.'s 11 million undocumented workers are frightened. Some say they're even in hiding. What impact is it having on communities? What's prompted this radical turn in policy from a nation known as the land of immigrants? Today in the France 24 debate, we're talking borderline politics. With us from Mexico City, Esteban Illades, journalist for Nexos magazine. We want to welcome as well from Washington, Raul Hinojosa Ojeda, director of the UCLA North American Integration and Development Center. Thank you for joining us. Welcome back to Pedro da Costa, senior correspondent for Business Insider. And from Los Angeles, California, attorney James Lacey is the author of Taxifornia. Pleasure to see you, sir. The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, the hashtag F24debate. A morning work session with his Mexican counterpart, a working lunch before a formal audience with the Mexican president. Rex Tillerson, a full day this Thursday, and you know it's a full agenda when that border wall becomes the second item on it. Rex Tillerson's hosts unequivocal about the new deportation policy. Here are some of the points that are spelled out. Make more immigrants subject to rapid deportation. Detain migrants awaiting court decision. Strip illegal aliens of privacy protections. Hire 15,000 more federal agents. And however, there is one aspect of it where he's promised to keep the child protection program for minors that are involved. The Mexican foreign minister unequivocal ahead of his sit-down with his U.S. counterpart.
I want to say clearly and emphatically that the government of Mexico and the Mexican people do not have to accept provisions that one government unilaterally wants to impose on the other. We will not accept it because there's no reason why we should and because it's not in the interests of Mexico.
Esteban Illades, what are you expecting from this visit?
Well, it depends actually. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. Well, I'm not really sure what to expect. I mean, Rex Tillerson has kept a really low profile. If you see the State Department communications from the past few weeks, there's no actual public briefing, so we don't know really what State Department is actually doing or what they plan to do. The Mexican government, on the other hand, has emphatically said no to most of Donald Trump's propositions and proposals and decrees. But we have to, I mean, the problem is that Donald Trump is in the United States and not in Mexico. So whatever Tillerson and Luis Videgaray, who is Mexico's foreign minister, actually managed to negotiate, along with John Kelly, who is the Homeland Secretary, Donald Trump can actually undo with one single tweet. So we don't really know what to expect or what can actually be achieved from this, since Donald Trump is not present at the meeting.
Yeah, that's an important point. We're going to pick up on that. A lot of reactions already on the hashtag F24debate. It's too bad Tillerson and Kelly must spend all their time on apology tours because of Donald Trump. Mexico this week, Europe last week. Is this an apology tour, Pedro da Costa?
Very much so. It's the difficult position, especially for a non-diplomat, to arrive in a country just as the president has made basically an aggressive and hostile stance toward a bordering nation a primary objective of his governing strategy. Today, he was speaking on live television before a group of media, but mostly CEOs, and he said, we're going to get along great with Mexico, and if we don't, we don't. And so that kind of attitude is very difficult for a non-diplomat who is now the chief diplomat of the United States to defend when he goes south of the border. Moreover, he doesn't have much of an agenda to sell to Mexico. It's been all confrontation, all about Mexico stealing American jobs, and this is really a distraction from much bigger economic problems that the Trump presidency and team should and could be focusing on. And this is a total red herring that is really just a political play on anti-immigrant fears and racism rather than something that's actually an economically based issue.
James Lacey, your thoughts? Is this a red herring, or is this just staking out a bargaining position?
Well, sure, it's a red herring. I mean, if the U.S. Secretary of State within the first month of his taking office didn't go to Mexico, what would the other panelists on your television show be saying, that the U.S. is ignoring Mexico? I mean, come on. Americans care about the relationship with Mexico, and they care about it because it's not just a question about jobs, it's a question about crime. We have real increases in violent crime in the United States, particularly in San Francisco and Chicago and in Los Angeles, where Mexican gangs, illegal aliens, and other criminals that come up from Latin America through the porous Mexican border are really harming people in the United States. You know, there's a statistic that says something like 1/3 of the human trafficking that occurs in the United States, that's trafficking in sex, and it includes forced labor, and it includes taking advantage of young girls and young boys for sex. 1/3 of that in the United States comes through this Mexican border. So of course the United States needs to respond. It needs to respond not only to protect its jobs, but to reduce crime. And that's a reason for the two countries to work together.
Let me ask Raul Hinojosa, what do your statistics say on this?
Well, I think that what the reality of it is that this relationship between Mexico and the United States, immigration in particular, is a huge benefit to the United States, much more than trade, by the way. We're talking more than $750 billion directly related to the undocumented workers that do all the labor in California and throughout the country. What doesn't make any sense from this mission is not only setting up a basically impossible diplomatic relationship rescue mission on the one hand. There is no upside to this. The deportation of people to Mexico will only hurt the U.S. economy much more, and by the way, affect probably the likelihood of more economic problems in Mexico. The cutting off of remittances to $25 billion will directly increase poverty rates to dramatic rates, not creating what we have now is a complementary economic migration and remittance relationship, very beneficial to the United States, but rather a vicious cycle that will only lead to even much more serious problems down the line. So, if this is an example of smart negotiations, it doesn't not only bode well for what Donald Trump wants to achieve with Mexico, but there is no upside for it for the United States.
But Raul, what do you answer when James Lacey says that illegal aliens from Mexico are responsible for a lot of the crime in America?
It's absolutely not true. As a matter of fact, the reality of it is that the typical Mexican immigrant is much less likely to participate in crime than the typical American. And in fact, in general, the Mexican immigrant to the United States contributes not only strongly economically, but fiscally to the United States. If everybody behaved like Mexicans in the United States, we'd have a lot less problems throughout the country, especially in the cities. Now, nobody is saying, and which is what the Obama administration had already focused on, which is, of course, going after criminal elements. Nobody has a problem with that. The problem is painting this broad brush for no reason to antagonize an entire working population and one of your principal trading and strategic partners in the world with no discernible upside that you're going to possibly get from this. Even if they built this wall, that would seriously not only deplete the American Treasury, but be completely ineffective in producing any benefit to the voters workers in the United States that were fooled by Trump in fearing that their economic problems are somehow related to Mexican immigration and trade, which they're not.
All right, I want to get back.
If I could just jump in for one quick second.
Sure.
Your question about Mexican immigrants not committing crimes. Well, there's 11 million Mexican immigrants in the United States.
No, it's
according
11
to
million
Pew Research.
undocumented aliens.
Right.
But they're not all
every
Mexican.
single one of them is a criminal because they've come into the United States illegally. What the president is trying to do is enforce the law. And the law says that those individuals are in the United States illegally. They need to register and go through a process. And if they register and go through a process, then they can get green cards. They can have
there is no registration possible, sir.
Above the board in our economic system, and they can pay taxes and not be a drain on the social
They pay
net
taxes
in
today.
the United States, which hurts the rest of our poor people.
And they don't receive social services. These are all lies that Donald Trump has fooled apparently you and many other people in this country.
There's 200,000 illegals in California that are receiving free medical care or subsidized medical care under Obamacare because the state of California got a waiver for them. No, our social services are being provided across the board to undocumented workers, but they're criminals. They're here illegally. You are stating fake news. It's a falsehood.
And you know who else is a criminal? Donald Trump is a criminal for hiring them. And so are all the employers in the United States that are hiring them. They should all be thrown in jail as well. Fine.
All right, let me bring in. Hold on. Let me bring in Pedro da Costa here, because the word criminal, does it apply? Because it is a crime, or at least a misdemeanor, isn't it, for crossing the U.S. border when you don't have the proper documentation? Does that make you a criminal?
I'm a U.S. attorney, and it is a crime.
So first of all, let me. Okay, that question was asked to me, sir. So thank you. There's a distinction. I'm not a lawyer, but there's a distinction between a crime and a civil violation, which I believe that being present in the United States illegal is a civil violation. You also have to distinguish between immigrants who cross the border, which you seem to be suggesting that there are just hordes of immigrants crossing every day. But if you actually look at the statistics, out of the 11 million undocumented immigrants, not illegal aliens, but undocumented immigrants who are working hard and living in this country. Excuse me, listen, let me finish, man. Let me finish. It's not Fox News. I told you last time.
If you want to fight a war
let me
over terminology,
finish.
they're illegal aliens.
Let me finish. Do I have the word, sir?
You do. Pedro da Costa.
Thank you. To my point, out of that 11 million population, which is certainly not all Mexican, half of it are people who came here legally on a visa and overstayed their visa. So the whole border wall is another canard, red herring, whatever you want to call it. It's a distraction from serious economic problems. And if you want to talk about jobs, the implementation of NAFTA, which Donald Trump likes to blame for all of America's woes, did very little to affect U.S. manufacturing employment. U.S. manufacturing employment remained quite steady, and you could argue that the very survival of many of the American firms that employ workers in the United States depended on their ability to outsource some of their operations to places like Mexico and China in order to be able to stay competitive globally. So you can't just talk about it as a zero-sum game.
All right, it's anyone's guess how many Mexicans could be legally deported if the United States chooses to actively enforce the laws on undocumented workers. One study warns of a huge population surge in Mexico, especially in the states that border the U.S. There are also fears of refugee camps popping up south of the border. This is a map showing how the population would swell in states if migrants returned from the U.S. Esteban Yades, what is the mood right now in Mexico?
Well, first of all, to the point that they were discussing earlier, there's an important statistic that everyone is missing. I mean, net migration is actually negative. That means there's more people coming back to Mexico than actually going to the United States. So actually building a wall to prevent people from going in is is not a sensible thing to do because there's less people actually going over there, right? And as to refugee camps as such, I mean, Barack Obama deported a record number of Mexican immigrants to this country. I mean, he was deporting about 1,000 a week. So there's nothing that would really change with that wall or would change with President Trump's already future activities. The mood here in Mexico, I mean, I would say that people, I mean, even if the international media is saying that we're actually angry, I mean, we're not really worried at this point right now because Donald Trump seems to be all talk. I mean, whatever he tweets, then it turns out that it's not legal. For example, with this whole Muslim ban, which he then said it wasn't a Muslim ban. I mean, the courts, the institutions in the United States actually work. So even if Donald Trump were to go off the rails, so to speak, I mean, the institutions in the United States work. As for the Mexican government as such, they haven't acted the way they should. I mean, they're starting to actually say no this time. They're saying, no, we're not going to take back immigrants that are not from Mexico. No, we're not going to build a wall. No, we're not going to let the United States walk out of NAFTA without actually renegotiating. So things are actually changing. I mean, for the first time in a long time, Mexican government is actually starting to stand up to the United States, noting that Donald Trump is mostly all talk and no action.
All right, we're going to pick up on these points and also look at the mood on both sides of the border when it comes to all the people who are undocumented. When we come back, you're watching the France 24 debate.